Well, good morning. My name is Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Project of World War II veterans. We're here at the Public Library of Cincinnati, and we're going to be talking with William J. Wichman, Bill Wichman, veteran of the Air Force in World War II in the Pacific. And our camera operator is Dennis Daly of the History Department of our public library, one of the greatest public libraries in the country, and the History Department is non-pareil. We're talking with Bill Wichman this morning, and I must say Bill and I have known each other for 50 years. And it's truly an honor, Bill, to be here with you. And we've talked before, but it's always great fun, and I know that your family is going to enjoy this very much, to be able to see this.
Did we get one?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
you get a DVD.
Good.
A copy goes to the Library of Congress archives in Washington,
Good.
Congress, and a copy stays here at the Public Library of Cincinnati. Bill, where were you born?
Seattle, Washington.
Beautiful, beautiful Seattle. Tell us about your family.
Well, my dad worked for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, the newspaper, excuse me, in the advertising department. My mother was born in Texas, lived in Idaho, went to work for the newspaper because she was a journalism student at the University of Washington, met my dad, married him. That's why we're here.
And you had a brother?
My brother, Bob, yes.
Oh, yeah, great guy, too.
He was.
I know, I remember him very well. Where did you start elementary school?
Montlake School in Montlake.
In Seattle?
In Seattle, yes.
Yeah. And then high school?
Queen Anne High School.
Oh boy, that's a famous high school.
Different neighborhood.
Sure, sure. And then along came time to go to college.
Right, University of Washington, 1941.
1941. Okay. You were a young guy in college too, weren't you?
17.
Right,
when I started.
Exactly. So what did you start out in college? What did you anticipate doing or wanting
I started out in journalism. I wanted to work in a newspaper because my dad was in the newspaper business. But along the way, I deviated from that and didn't go that route.
Right, exactly. Well, we can talk about that too, but where were you on Pearl Harbor Day? Do you remember Pearl Harbor Day?
I was in my backyard in Magnolia kicking a football. And of course, everything stopped in the street.
Sure.
And we went from there.
Well, we both are West Coasters, Northwesterners, and of course we remember that the news came to us at noon on the 7th of December.
Yeah.
And of course,
about when it was.
The East was 3 hours beyond us already. So it was a startling time, and it's one of those seminal moments in a person's life that you never forget about.
I remember kicking the football in the news, but I didn't have any conception of what it was going to mean.
Of course, right.
No conception.
Many of us didn't even know Pearl Harbor. What's that? You know,
Yeah,
where
right.
is it? So on and so forth. Well, as you went on through college, working your way through, and you were getting older, of course, what was the situation with the government, Uncle Sam, and the service?
Well, I started by going down to try to enlist in the Naval Air Corps because I wanted to be a pilot on that Monday. And it was a startling experience because they paid no attention to me. And I couldn't, my feelings were hurt, I couldn't understand it, but in retrospect, they were probably scrambling to do something. Since I was 17, there was no interest.
No way.
So that was
No
that.
way.
That was that.
Yeah.
So then we continued on to college.
Right, of course. And as time progressed, you finally got to the point where they did pay attention to you.
They did pay attention. My mother I wanted to join the Army Air Corps, and I actually have a thing in my file that shows my dad signed the permission slip. But my mother intervened, and I got enrolled in what was known as the Enlisted Reserve Corps,
Right.
which was supposed to enable you to finish college until April of 1943, when they paid attention to me again.
So that attention was paid to by you, and where did they send
They
you?
sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington for a week.
Right down the line.
We were all the enlisted reserve corps was marched or trucked to the railroad station at once. The parents all came down, kissed the boys goodbye,
Yep.
and we went down to Fort Lewis, and they came down for the weekend, the next weekend.
Really?
And then I was shipped to Atlantic City on a train, and I slept in an upper bunk with my best friend, Wright Arnold, which was a miserable trip with two people in an upper bunk. And we arrived at Atlantic City and went into the basement of the Dennis Hotel, where this corporal, who wasn't a very important figure, but which we didn't realize that at the time, paraded up and down in front of us for 45 minutes, terrifying us with what was going to happen.
Well, he had some self-importance there, obviously.
Yes, he did.
That's interesting. So, but of all places to be sent from Fort Lewis, Washington, near Tacoma, all the way across to Atlantic City.
We were on the 6th floor of the Dennis Hotel, which was very fancy, 6 people in a room.
Right.
And I was in the Signal Corps at that time. So that was basic training. Every day we marched out to a place called Brigantine Field, which was an abandoned garbage dump, and marched up and down. As you know, that's what you do.
Oh, yeah.
Singing "Wait Till the Sun Shines, Nellie."
Left, right, left,
And
right.
then I was sent to Pauling, New York, in cryptography school.
Cryptography school.
Cryptography
That's heady stuff.
Heady stuff, but I really didn't understand it. Pauling was a very fancy prep school. One night, Lowell Thomas came to our school, and we went in the day room, and all of us, not all of us, but some of us sat in there. He broadcast the news from there.
Oh boy.
Saying, "This is here we are, hush hush place," and all that. And I was there about 2 months, and I applied again to the Air Corps, and they told me to come down for an interview, which I did in New York. And I took the physical, but I passed for navigator, but not for pilot. The depth perception
Right.
was a problem.
Right.
So ultimately, I was shipped to, I went back to Pauling, and they transferred me to Greensboro, Army Air Base for Air Corps.
South
Basic.
Carolina.
Yeah, basic training,
How about that?
which was okay.
Yeah, right.
2 months or whatever it is.
Right. What an experience for a young guy
I'll
from
say.
the Northwest.
You know about that, Ted.
Oh boy, I mean to us Northwesterners, in those days, that was
There wasn't
foreign territory.
There wasn't a civilian face on the street in Greensboro. Everybody was in khaki.
Right.
Right. So
Very
then,
good.
where'd we go?
Military presence.
Then I went to, I think, college training in Lafayette, Pennsylvania,
Ah,
for several months
okay.
in the winter of
44?
73, I think.
44?
No, it was the winter of 73.
You
What?
mean 43?
43, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 43, that's
Yeah.
better. And then I went to aviation cadet training at Montgomery, Alabama, which was I wasn't very happy in the military up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got there, I had a good time. It was a great experience. We studied Morse code. Why, I don't know, but we did. And aircraft identification. Why, I don't know, because I sat in the back of the plane and never looked down. And then I went for about 2 months to Greenwood, Mississippi, just a holding base, which was an amazing place because that was the Deep South,
Oh, boy.
where the people in the holding base were sent out on the river to fill sandbags, the Yazoo River. And so the soldiers were filling sandbags, the white soldiers, with the black people. And all the white Southerners were looking on with amazement, because that's not what they did down
Well, of
there.
course not. That was the beginning of integration.
And then I went to navigation school. I went to Jefferson Barracks, where we had that little thing about the beheadings,
Yes.
and was classified. That's called classification.
Now, you're still a cadet.
Yes, I was
Right.
classified as a navigator, to be a navigator. And then I went to navigation school in Ellington Field, Houston, for 4 months. And we flew 2 or 3 times a week practicing our navigation in Lockheed Electras, which aren't around anymore.
That's right.
And my mother came down for my graduation in December 1944,
Isn't that something?
which was nice.
Boy.
And then she was going to Los Angeles to visit friends, and so I went to Los Angeles, hitchhiked to Los Angeles on Army planes for Christmas. And then after Christmas, I went to radar school in Victorville, California.
How about that?
How about that? Yeah.
Hitchhiking on airplanes is a very interesting term that a lot of people don't quite understand. Tell us about what it was like, what you had to do for waiting for a plane.
I don't remember much about that, except we were kicked off partway in because they had to put some tires on.
Priority people.
Big tires. No, not people, tires.
Oh, tires.
They put us off and put the tires on.
That's when the rubber hits the road, huh?
Then we finally got to Los Angeles.
Oh,
and spent
my
Christmas.
gosh. Isn't that something? Well, then, you were still on orders, though, weren't you, in L.A.?
I was supposed to go to Victorville by a certain time after
I see.
Christmas. After Christmas.
Okay. And Victorville was
Radar school.
radar school. Oh,
I can't remember much about that. We did we'd go to a hangar in this big tower with, like 10, 15 feet high with a bomb sight on it. We were supposed to practice with a map underneath, practice maneuvering the tower to the target. And we must have had flight training, but I have zero memory of that. We must have had.
it was a pretty intense time for you.
Well, but you don't notice that, Ted. You
don't at the time,
You
but
don't notice that.
on reflection,
On reflection.
you were zeroing in on what you had to learn.
That's true. But I can't imagine why I can't remember the flight training. I think they had B-24s there, but I just can't remember.
Right. Well, the B-24, and that was a pretty impressive aircraft too. So how long were you at Victorville?
Probably 2 months.
Okay.
And then I came home. No, I didn't come home. Then I went to Lincoln, Nebraska for a pool to be assigned to a crew.
I see.
And I was there about a week or two. And I was assigned to a B-29 crew at Alamogordo Army Air Base.
Oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah.
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
How about that?
And a very fortunate assignment. I got a great crew, a great pilot, a great navigator.
This
great
was the
people.
B-29.
B-29. And we were there from, probably 3 months maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And we flew 3 or 4 times a week in a B-29.
How do you rate the B-29 as an aircraft?
I'm not qualified to do that. At that time, it was rated as a dangerous aircraft because the engines didn't work right.
Really?
Really.
Who built the B-29? Was that
Boeing.
Boeing. Okay.
And you had to just qualify. Before you graduated, you have to take a 3,000 mile trip. This tells you about the engines. Took us 3 tries because the engines failed on the first 2.
Holy cow.
But I was reading some of the material you sent me last night.
Yeah.
And the article said the B-29 had problems, but it was fixed by the time you got to combat.
Okay.
So anyway, I graduated. Well, you don't graduate from that. You just the training was completed, I went home for a leave, for a week, I guess. Then we went back to Kearney, Nebraska, to fly to the Pacific. The crew, everybody met, and I don't know where the enlisted men were. I think the officers went to Kearney, Nebraska.
Okay.
The enlisted men went their own way. I'll say this, that Alamogordo was a great experience.
Tell us about that.
Well, every day, not every day, several times a week, we flew out to a place called Wilcox Lake in Arizona and practiced radar bombing. And that was about all there was to it. But
Was that dropping?
we didn't drop anything. We just went over, simulated bombing, and they took pictures of where we were when the bombs should have been dropped.
Sure.
So we did that.
How about that? Well, you know, it's amazing, and your family will be wide-eyed at all of this because of your travels around the country.
I think I went to 20 different places before.
Good.
So did you?
Yeah.
20 different places.
Something like that. Yeah. Well, that's just
So
wonderful.
then we went to Kearney, Nebraska, and I think we were only there a half a day. And we got on a C-54 and flew to Mather Field, California, which I think is where everybody in the Air Force flew to the Pacific.
That was the hop-off point.
We were there overnight, and the next day we got on the C-54. I don't know what's wrong with my voice, but something's wrong with it.
Yeah, now that C-54, that was that big transport, wasn't it?
And the five of us, with some other people, of course, we flew to Honolulu 11 hours, which is a long trip in a propeller-driven plane.
I should say.
And we spent 2 days there, which was delightful. I went surfing, and we went out for a drink. We went to the Mauna Loa Hotel. We stayed at Hickam Field,
Okay.
and then had 2 days to...
Was Hickam pretty well cleaned up by that time?
Yeah, oh yeah,
After
we
Pearl
didn't
Harbor?
notice anything. We just...
You didn't notice anything?
No, we didn't notice anything. And then, after the 2 days there, we flew to a place called Kwajalein, which is another long flight.
The Marshall Islands.
Marshall Islands. Spent the night there. I do remember when we got out of the plane at Kwajalein, I got out of the back of the plane and I turned around, there was a wrecked Jap plane, which really alarmed me. It did alarm me. I got my 45 out, but there was nobody there.
This is the real war.
Yeah, right. And
How about that?
I went to the bathroom and the latrine there, and a guy was, I can't think of his name. He wrote, anyway, he had his initials on his briefcase, and the guy I can't think of his name, but he wrote a famous poem, "But God is My Co-Pilot."
Oh, sure.
He was a pioneer aviator, and he was on his way out to the Pacific with his briefcase.
Yeah. How about that?
And then we flew to Guam, which is another long trip, and spent the day in Guam, which was delightful. Went out to Tumon Bay, went swimming, had
That's
a good
in the
time.
Marianas Islands.
Yes.
Right.
And that night we flew to Tinian, which is about an hour away, and went to a tent. All the officers were sleeping in a circular tent, and we were playing poker. And I said, I got up to go to the bathroom, and I took my money off the table, which was a social error.
Yes.
And the navigator became incensed. The pilot had to calm us down.
How about that?
And then we moved to that Quonset, where there are 12 people were in there. I was in there with the pilot, Bob Marshall, the co-pilot, and 9 other people.
You remember the name of your pilot?
Bob Marshall, never forget it.
Oh, co-pilot.
No, the co-pilot was Ted Woodruff.
Okay.
Marshall was marvelous.
Yeah.
And during the missions, I went to an alternate, I flew one mission as a substitute on reflection, which is damn foolish, because you have no knowledge of what they're like.
Right.
And we got there on June 6th, got in the Quonset a couple days later, and went for some training on like ditching, training on medical procedures, whatnot.
Now, we're talking 1945, right? June?
1945,
Right.
June of 1945.
Hmm.
And what I remember about the medical training was they asked me to inject morphine into the radio operator's arm. And I couldn't puncture the skin, and that poor devil was there for like 10 minutes while I was poking him. And we jumped in the water with our Mae West, and I don't believe they gave us ditching training because I have no memory of that.
That was very important to know how to handle that Mae West if you got in the water.
Yeah, that's true.
Because there were sad cases of people that didn't do it right.
And on the ditching, I don't think we had the training. And I'm wondering that maybe the reason they didn't give it to our crew was that if you sat in the back, if you were in the back of the plane, you had a very limited chance to get out.
Right.
You had to come to the tail gunner and all 3 or 4 rooms, a 60-foot tunnel. In the front, there were more than one 504th crew where 6 survived in the front.
Mm-hmm.
6 in the front and 5 didn't, because it's a long trip from the tail to the front.
Yeah.
So we started the missions we flew our first mission on June 26th to Nagoya, and that's the only mission that I remember that was caused a little tension because we failed a rendezvous with the formation.
Hmm.
And
How many planes would be in the formation?
25 or 30.
Okay.
We were rendezvousing at Bayonnaise Rocks, and we were there for 45 minutes, circling around. The weather was terrible. It was a very frightening sight, and finally the pilot got on the radio or on the phone and said, "We're going to go in by ourselves," which is not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And we did, and it worked out.
Boy,
So, anyway.
thank goodness you're still here.
I don't think there were terrible losses in the beginning because so many planes ran out of gas.
Yeah, now that's a good point.
I'm
Tell
going
us
to drink
about
your water,
that.
Ted, to
Yeah,
correct
go
my...
ahead. You were flying out of Tinian
Tinian.
at that time. Iwo Jima had been secured, though, hadn't
Yes.
it? Which was
Yeah,
closer.
but not in the very beginning.
No.
But yeah, it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were flying, 600-700 miles from Tinian?
It was a 14-hour round trip, 3,000 miles. Which we didn't realize. I didn't as not being the navigator, I never realized that. It took 7 hours to get there and 7 hours to get back.
Good heavens, just imagine. Boy, that was really a trying time. Well, Bill, you're mentioning flying over Nagoya, one of the major cities on the island of Honshu. You were getting a great geography lesson too, weren't you, as a person who had never been in that part of the world?
Well, I got the geography lesson through the radar scope.
That's right.
Since I never worked out, or looked out.
What was it like being on that scope all the time? You had
Well,
your concentration.
I'm looking for the brochure. I can't see.
Because the concentration of a radar
I can't find
officer had to be intense.
For a few minutes, yes. But since I was a navigator, I navigated as best I could on the way up with taking a fix on an island,
Okay.
finding out how far away it was, what the degrees were, and then I would feed that to the navigator.
Oh.
It didn't bring my E6B computer. I had it out to get, but I didn't think it applied. But we had a little, as a navigator, you had this little computer, and if you put in the heading, the airspeed, the time, and the bearing of, and your location, you can get a wind.
Right.
Winds are, getting a wind, the direction and the
Very important.
velocity of the wind is very
Sure.
important over 1,500 miles.
Right, exactly.
So,
And that huge plane, jeepers.
well, anyway, so I would navigate. Did I show you those islands? Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as there were islands, we would do that.
Right.
And then,
Kind of flying by the seat of your pants.
well, no, we weren't flying by the seat of our
Well,
pants
it's
because you were here, then you were here, then you were here, and you can draw a line and see where you're going. When we got to Japan, it was my job with a radar to locate what they call the initial point, which is this the plane goes to the initial point, and then you turn on a certain heading to the target. So at that point, I would take charge of the direction of the plane and say, when we got the initial point, and say, turn to a heading of whatever the heading was for the target. And then I would watch the plane on the radar and see if it was on course. And as I recall, there was a continuing dialogue with the pilot saying 2 degrees right, 1 degree left, 2 degrees, just to make sure. And
when did you relinquish that particular duty?
when we got a certain number of miles from the target,
Okay.
I would call the the bombardier, and say, Stan, you take over. The bomb sight was programmed at that point to release the bombs at the right point to hit the target.
I see.
And
Was that the Norden bomb site?
yeah, that was the Norden bomb site.
Famous. Yeah.
And when the bombs went out, the whole plane jumped up about 3 feet.
Right.
And then
What kind of a bomb load did you carry? How much?
we had, I don't know whether it was 10 or 20.
10 or 20 tons.
No, 1,000 pounds. Yeah, 10 or 20,000 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you sent me all those papers.
Yeah.
And the paper said that there was never a B-29 that took off that wasn't overloaded.
Really?
They loaded them up, which was perhaps foolish, because
Kinda
it could
dangerous.
handicap the takeoff,
And with the so-called problems that the B-29 had with its engines, that
Well, fortunately, we never had a problem. We had one of the most important members of the crew was the flight engineer.
yes.
Ours was Steve Red Passage. And when we went to the plane before takeoff, everybody sat around and kidded. Not Steve Passage. He was working on
Right.
making sure everything was right.
Boy.
And
How many in the crew of a B-29?
11.
11.
There's a bombardier, 2 pilots, navigator, radar operator, 3 gunners. 3 gunners? Yeah, 3 gunners and the radar guy.
Right.
So,
Well, now, when you were zeroing in on the targets for bombing,
yes,
of
I'm listening.
course, you were greatly affected by the weather. You had to have fairly clear vision. didn't
No,
you?
not with radar.
Not with radar.
Not with radar. We only flew, I was looking for I didn't bring it, but that's the thing you copied, Janine. We flew, our crew flew 2 daylight missions, 2 daylight,
Right.
26,000 feet, which is hazardous to your health because it
26,000.
uses up the gas.
Wow.
And the story on that is when the General LeMay arrived, he looked at the results for the first 3 months, and they practically never hit the target. The winds were 200 miles an hour.
Good heavens.
I have the LeMay video, and it shows, and the guy's talking on the video, he had plane cribbed 45 degrees, and it still wasn't going to the target because of the wind. They didn't hit much. LeMay came and decided that wouldn't work, and he said, we're going to go at night at 9,000 feet, which was a shock to the pilots.
I should say.
Shock to the pilots. And our crew flew 6 low-level incendiary missions and 6 low-level mining missions at 9,000 feet.
It's really scary.
Well, it wasn't. And by that time, that was a standard procedure.
Okay.
It was scary at the beginning, and there is a story that the pilots got up. Some pilots got up and threw their wings into the cigar box,
Yes.
but they got over that.
Okay. Now, did you have fighter escorts at all? Or
We had fighter escorts sometimes but not at night, from Iwo.
Yeah.
From Iwo.
They'd pick you up as you came
Yeah.
over.
Anyway, one of the things that's little known about the B-29 program is that the mining of the Japanese harbors. We mined practically every harbor of any significance in Japan, and they couldn't even move a boat in a harbor. They couldn't even transfer from one dock to the other. It was completely shut down.
How about that?
And
Now, what elevation would you drop mines from?
9,000, 8,000, 9,000.
Doesn't sound like it'd be very accurate, does it?
I don't know. Well, you could see the target on the radar,
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
bombs,
Okay.
incendiary.
I see, okay.
I never really, I think I only saw one burning city. That was Wakayama. I must have gotten up from my radar when the bombs went up, took a look at it.
I see. Well, dropping those, having those mines aboard the plane, what were they? How big were they? Do you remember?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't know how big they were.
Okay.
But that was a hell of an important thing.
Oh, of course.
It completely shut down all of that. And we went several times to Shimonoseki Straits, which is between Kyushu and Honshu,
Right.
their main shipping channel,
Sure. Yeah.
and some other cities as well.
Huh. Well, you were in not only making history yourself, but you were in historic territory at Shimonoseki Strait. You know, it figured so heavily in the Russo-Japanese War
Yeah.
in 1903.
Mhm.
Yeah. How about that? So you never landed in Japan after the end of the war or anything like
A
that?
guy in our Quonset did, Tom Cleveland, and he was grounded, demoted. You weren't supposed to land in Japan.
Oh,
And he could barely get his plane out. And
really?
he brought back a Bombay full of Japanese rifles, of which I got one,
Hmm.
which was good to have.
Right, nice souvenir.
When you got over the target, and after it was done, the navigator took over, and we went home. Took 7 hours, which is surprising.
How
7 hours.
7 hours one way.
One way.
Just imagine.
7 hours,
Oh
right.
my gosh, that's a
And when
long.
we got home, we went to the dining hall. The pilot and the co-pilot probably were debriefed, but they didn't brief the rest of us. And they gave you a little bottle of bourbon, miniature bourbon, and ice cream, which was nice.
What a treat.
So really, our crew never had any real difficulty except on that first time.
But on a long trip like that, Bill, you had to have food. What was the food like?
Well, I read mine.
You remember that?
I can't.
You didn't have a chef aboard
If you
the
read
boat.
my mother's letter, or my letter to my mother, it said, the only thing we had to eat was cold bacon sandwiches. I want a discharge, is what it says in the letter.
Any funny experiences, humorous things as you can think of?
Yes.
Besides your poker game where you picked up your wallet.
The prelude to the flight, a mission was always interested. We stood around, we got to the plane. The briefings were interesting. It was like 300 people there. It was like in the movies, where the colonel comes in,
Yep.
announces the target. The next guy comes in and says, shows all the pictures, and the weatherman gets up.
Wow.
Whenever the weatherman got up, they booed him because he never had the weather right. And then it took about 30 minutes, and then everybody stood up and they synchronized the watches.
Yeah.
They counted it down, and you pushed your watch. And then the crew, by crew, and I have no memory of a radar briefing. There might have been a navigation briefing, but I don't know about that. All of us went to the truck, and we drove down the North Field, which is an interesting phenomenon. 8,500 feet runways.
Wow.
Built by the Seabees, and I don't know, not very many months.
Construction battalion was fabulous.
Unbelievable. And we met a guy on our first reunion whose uncle was a CB, or his brother or something. He weighed 200 pounds when it started, when building the runways. He weighed 150 when they worked 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Just imagine.
And these runways are enormous. But anyway, we got there, and everybody went to his position, checked out. I would check out whether the radar would work.
Right.
The bombardier would look at the bomb sight and navigate. The gunners would check their guns. And then we would come back out and kind of joke around for a while, except for Red Passage and the pilots who were working feverishly. The rest of us were perhaps not as responsible. And then we would walk the propellers through. Are you familiar with that? You walked each propeller 2 or 3 revolutions. The people would line up and go through, and then you go to the next engine, the next engine, and the next engine. And then, I don't know whether this was standard procedure, our pilot would line us up in formation, and he would get out in front, and he would have what we called a formation. We would have what he called a formation piss. I never knew whether that was to empty your bladder or to lessen the tension or what. But there wasn't really much tension at that point, because you didn't know if it, there was not much knowledge of anybody being lost.
Well, you know, talking about those propellers, 4 blades.
Mm-hmm.
You remember how long the blade of those propellers was?
They're huge. I can't
10 or
remember.
12 feet?
It took a long time to walk them all through.
Just imagine. And that was kind of to
Something about
open up
eliminate hydraulic lock or
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And we did that, and then we all got back on the plane, and the pilot would get on the intercom and say, "Bombardier ready, co-pilot ready, navigator," and you'd all answer.
Checklist.
And then, this is an impressive sight, then the plane would taxi toward the takeoff point. And if you could look, I would sit in the blister, you could look back and see maybe 30 B-29s when you turn the corner, all their engines idling.
What a sight.
And this is a humorous thing. I made it humorous anyway. When we got turned onto the runway, once or twice, the minister, our chaplain was there, wishing us well. And I didn't think about this to the end until I was preparing for my talk at the ILR, and I said, well, he was either wishing us well or waving goodbye. You couldn't tell which. Anyway.
Probably a combination of
And
both.
this is a phenomenon. There were 2 runways that they used. You took off a plane on this runway, and in 45 seconds, another plane, so it would haul off. Man, can you imagine?
Oh,
The plane, they went off a cliff. It went down a little bit toward the water. Crowds on Saipan would watch that because sometimes not very often, but sometimes they wouldn't make it, or it was a dramatic sight to see
goodness sake.
30 or 50 planes shooting out.
Just a match.
Yeah, it was something else.
I know it. That's something that today,
Anyway.
you know, we can't even.
I have another thing in here, Ted, which
All right.
I'll give to Dennis.
Well, you know that.
This is a description.
Oh,
this
good.
is a general order for a B-29 mission.
Okay.
Extremely detailed and complicated. The thing that they go 3 minutes this way, 3 minutes that way, 3 minutes this way to keep from having collisions.
And were you varying your altitude?
No, you weren't varying your altitude, but
Maintained it.
well, Dennis can read that. It's unbelievably detailed.
That is, well, those are wonderful, wonderful things to have. You've done well to keep those things.
Our association got that. But anyway, when you left the target, it took 7 hours, and everybody slept,
Okay.
pretty much.
All right. And at that time, the Japanese Air Force was pretty depleted.
Totally.
They couldn't come up and trail you. Or
The diary there says it was an occasional plane, not much flak.
Right.
So
Describe flak. A lot of people don't know.
anti-aircraft.
Okay.
So I had no visual knowledge of anything happening. I could sometimes hear over the intercom, but my diary which is an amazing thing. There's not many diaries of each mission for a
Right.
crew.
Right. Good for you.
And what I did was get the information from the co-pilot and copy it down, you know, takeoff, bomb load,
Right.
landing, et cetera. And then he had little comments on the bottom about what he thought, you know.
is
That's historic, really.
That's precious.
The only thing is it's in my handwriting. It's hard to read. You can't
Well,
read it.
we'll sit down and
I'm going to give that to Dennis,
absolutely,
or a copy of it.
that'll be
anyway.
wonderful. Well, Dennis will know what to do with it, and we're moving along here very nicely.
I can describe life on Tinian, which was very
Please do
pleasant.
that.
Very pleasant. I mean, a lot of people in World War II had a miserable time. But
Yes.
life on Tinian was nice. We had a laundry called the Gook Laundry, where they did our laundry. We had a movie, which you could go to several times a week. And you had, when it rained a lot, you had to sit with your raincoat like that over your knees, and when you got up, you had to dump the raincoat, but we enjoyed it anyway. We had, at the movie theater, we had a couple of USO shows, which were pretty nice.
Right? Did you ever see Bob Hope?
No, the only guy we saw was, I can't think of his name. He's Eddie Bracken, who's
Oh yeah.
who's a jerk, who made all the officers get out of the front row and go to the back, which hurt my feelings.
Oh, well, yes, that's
Yeah.
discrimination.
Yeah, it was, since most of the officers were aircrew, you know.
Yeah.
But we had the Major League Baseball came once.
No kidding.
Skeet shooting, which I did once. Which
Sounds like a country
severely damaged my shoulder. My shoulder was blue and yellow for a week after that. And I've never done it since. We had a fantastic place to swim. You climbed down about a 100-foot cliff with jury-rigged ropes and steps. And there was this beautiful beach and this coral lagoon. And you'd have maybe 100 or 200 people out there on life rafts at a time. To get in, the big surf, to get in, you had to time your coming in so that you got enough surf, not to kill you,
Yeah.
but enough to get in.
Yeah.
And I remember you could swim underwater in these big caverns. It was beautiful. Why nobody was eaten by a shark, I don't know, but nobody was. I once had big waves. I rode the wave up maybe 15 feet onto a rock ledge and jumped off.
How about that?
And then, when the next 2 or 3 waves later, you'd step off and go back down 15 feet.
How about that?
Our co-pilot, who was a dear friend of mine, went out with us swimming, and he wasn't too good at swimming. And when he came back in, every time the water was, you know what a puss is, where the water rushes out? Every time he got halfway in, he stepped in a hole and went out again, which we thought was hilarious, but it wasn't hilarious for him because he was gradually
Very dangerous.
getting more tired, but he got
Right.
out anyway.
He survived.
He survived.
Thank goodness. I should say.
We had an officers club, which was nice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we'd go over there and we played ping
So
pong.
hold that up. So yeah.
And there we are.
There we are. Yeah.
Here's the pilot. Here's me. Here's Woodruff. There's Charlie Crum, a pilot's friend.
How about
Woody
that?
and I would play ping pong over there. We didn't go over there at night much, but when we went at night, the majors and the colonels were playing poker. Money was piled about that
Really?
high in the middle of the thing. Anyway, so that was another piece of entertainment.
How long did you stay on Tinian before you were?
We stayed 6 months on Tinian.
Did you really?
Yeah, June to January. That's 7 months, actually.
Yeah.
Almost 7
Long
months.
after the war.
Yeah, well, you have to have points. Points are amount of combat, married, children, and we didn't have enough.
Didn't have enough.
Didn't
So
have.
you stayed in until you got your points.
And actually, what happened was we spent we didn't do anything after well, we did some interesting things. I should go back to this. After the war, We had 2 flyovers over Tokyo, August 28th and September 2nd. And in a way, that's historic. When we flew over Tokyo, it was like a vacant lot. Everything was burned. Dirt, brown dirt, no buildings, nothing. I guess there were buildings around the palace and stuff like that. On September 2nd, I hate to say this, but we missed the formation again. We were supposed to go to Chosey Point, which is a town we burned out at the beginning, and then get in formation and go over Tokyo Bay to let the... August 28th was designed to intimidate the Japanese with maybe 500 B-29s, you know, going over. September 2nd, I guess, was the same thing. But again, we missed the formation, and it takes a lot of guts for somebody to do this. The pilot decided to go on his own, and we flew alongside the Missouri at 3,600 feet twice, this way and that way. And Woody, the co-pilot, waggled the wings, and which was, not too many people do that. This is the only picture, I'm sure, like that.
Isn't that something? I know that is a remarkable photograph.
But that was only part of the post-combat. Then we flew 2 missions to drop supplies to POW camps.
Oh.
We flew our plane over to Saipan, where they had, I guess they had the supplies, and spent the day there while they loaded our plane. And that's in my diary, the flights. We went to Fukuoka number 8 and Fukuoka number 12, but there was no information on where the hell they were. So, and I think in both cases we burned up a lot of time, which you don't want to do, right? Looking for the camps.
I know.
And it's in the diary how the altitude, I think it was 1,000 feet or 3,000 feet.
That's pretty close.
And when we went over, the prisoners all ran out in the yard, waving their
Waved
arms.
to you.
And I was at the window for that.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, and that was also, you talk about time.
14 hours each way.
And,
or 7 hours each way.
Using a lot of fuel, too.
Well, we landed on Iwo 4 times. I wouldn't say, a couple of them were running short of gas. We never landed on Iwo because of damage or anything like that. We had no damage. But I should mention our most dramatic mission,
Yes.
which was to Rasheen and Sashin in North Korea, which is right adjacent to Vladivostok. It took 19 hours and 57 minutes in the air, which is almost unbelievable when you think of it.
Just a bit.
If you went, we flew to Iwo Jima, gassed up, went up there and back. It was 14 hours from Iwo Jima
Just a
to
bit.
Rasheen and Sashin and back, which if I had known that, I would have been worried. But I'm not being the navigator, I didn't know that.
Huh.
And then we gassed up again and went back to Tinian.
Wow.
That's you. If you ditched on the way to and from Japan, they had an elaborate network of submarines.
Yes.
All you had to do was say, "This is plane such and such. Our position is this. We're going to ditch," and the submarines would come.
They'd come to rescue.
But not in North Korea.
No.
There was nobody there. Nobody there. We spent. I was on Iwo 4 times, and it was a desolate, dismal
Yes.
place. We went down on the beach, Woody and I. The sand was about that deep, you could hardly walk in it.
That black volcanic
Black volcanic, and there was still broken vehicles on the beach.
Sure.
We went in a cave. I'm going to get this picture out and put in there. Where a Jap general's cave. We got into the back of this cave, and there was a whole, whoops, what's that? I ruined my thing again. Sorry.
Now
Okay, anyway, went into this cave, and we got to the back of the cave, and there was a big wall covered with yellow and brown roaches, which suggested to us that there were some dead people in there. So we turned right around and went out. We stayed overnight. I don't know why we stayed overnight. I can't. Slept in a tent. Went to the movies. I won't use this terminology. The tape broke, and the crowd erupted. Focus, focus, focus. About 1 minute of that, and the operator put his head out and said, "F you guys."
Do you remember any of the movies you saw?
No, I don't remember.
I know.
And then there was a gnarled tree in the middle of where we were in one of the camps, and it said Iwo Jima National Forest on it.
One tree.
And in exploring the island, I came across one of the marine cemeteries, and it took my breath away.
Oh, yes.
There were 6,000 people killed in 5 weeks there,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is a lot of people.
It is.
And I I took a picture of it.
It was not what we had originally planned on.
I don't know what happened.
I know.
It was worse. They were tougher than we anticipated.
Yes.
And they had cannons embedded in the stone and doors to open up
Right.
and shoot people. And my friend Marvin Veronea, who was on Iwo Jima, and later on Japan, said they had the same thing in Japan. They had these emplacements with guns and doors opening and
Good
closing.
heavens.
To go to the atom bomb, every day, every time we went down to the flight line for a mission, we passed what looked like 2 grease pits. And then about several hundred yards beyond that is where we parked. And it turned out, in retrospect, that was the parking place for the atom bomb planes, the 509th
Really?
Composite Group.
Right.
And nobody knew anything about it. It's interesting to note that the 504th was a very well-known and good bomb group. We donated a squadron to them after they got there for a couple of months to help them get started. Our 398th Squadron went to the 509th for that period of time. And when we went to fly to, what do you call it, Wright-Patterson to hear Tibbets, he mentioned the 504th, which was good.
Absolutely.
So we did that. What else did we do? Food was okay. The best thing they had was powdered ice cream, which was delicious. We had a latrine not 100 yards from our place, our house, our Quonset, and they burn creosote in that every night to destroy the waste. And it turned out that a guy by the name of Fearless Fighting effing McLean fell asleep in there, and when they found him in the morning, he was all black.
Oh, gosh.
And there was a tank. Oh, I didn't. No, I didn't do it. There was a tank that
There
you
you
could
go.
take a shower under. And the theory was there was a gook up there urinating.
Oh, my God.
Anyway,
Oh.
so it was a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
It was. After the war, we built a deck on our Quonset. We had railing. Did we have a roof? We might have even had a roof, so we could sit around out there. And it wasn't an unpleasant experience.
Well, it was important, and it's important for people to understand the necessity for having things like that. And at that time during the war, you were able to, because it was good for the morale. It was good to keep you guys sharp, which was so important.
Yes. Anyway, Tinian was a night. Janine saw a movie on Tinian last night. Beautiful place, really.
Yeah. It's grown up a lot.
And
I understand.
I explored Tinian once with a guy by the name of John McCabe, who was a navigator in our barracks in our Quonset. We went down into the jungle at the other end of the island, and we came across a lizard about this long.
Wow.
I went up a tree. McCain, who was an Arctic trapper, chased him into the bush, which was McCabe. But we didn't go many places on the island.
Right.
It was named for New York City. There was a Broadway in New York, Riverside Drive. And then we went to the Philippines for 9 months.
9 months?
Those of us that didn't have enough points, the bomb group transferred to the Philippines.
So you
On-
saw Manila when it was
Yeah.
still desolate.
I know, on the Liberty ship, which, when they took the North Koreans, or the Koreans off on a Korean vessel, the captains wore bandanas. There was a latrine on the back, built on the back of the ship. Even in the harbor, the ship was rolling like this, which was indicative of their civilization at that time.
Right.
And ours was a Liberty ship, John C. Ainsworth. And we slept 5 to a bunk, or 4 to a bunk.
Mm-hmm.
The latrine was a running sluice, and like has probably happened more than once, somebody lit a newspaper at the top of the sluice and went down the sluice. It was so hot, people slept on the decks.
Yes.
And when we got to, it was a beautiful trip in a way. I saw a 14-foot tiger or hammerhead shark go across the front of the ship, called bow Ted.
The bow.
The islands of the Philippines were beautiful in the dawn, and when we got to Manila, there were still sunken ships.
Oh, yeah.
They said the ladies of the evening came out in sampans, and they had to turn fire hoses on them to keep them away. And then we got in a truck and went to Clark Field, where I stayed for 9 months.
Wonderful.
It's a
Bill,
beautiful place, really.
right, right. Now that's all changed, of course. The Philippines being an independent nation now, we've relinquished that right, so to speak. Well, Bill, this has just been a fantastic experience to hear you explain so beautifully, and your erudition is wonderful, and I know your family is going to enjoy
We're
this.
going to I'm going to give some of this
Yes.
stuff to Dennis if he can use it.
Absolutely.
Especially the stuff that Ted gave me.
Absolutely.
Ted is a military historian, you know.
Well,
And the one by Hap Arnold on the strategy for defeating Japan
oh yes.
was marvelous.
And I was glad to hear you say how you enjoy the U.S. Air Force Museum up
Yeah,
in Fairborn,
great.
which is one of the
Great.
greatest places in the world.
Give me one more minute, then we went to the Philippines, where we stayed for 9 months. Very delightful. Flew only one mission, searching for a general who'd lost his, I did 2 things there. Lost his B-29 between Saipan
Oh my gosh.
and the Philippines, which is one hell of a long way again.
Yes.
And we got all the way out there, and we went over a rock called Parisa Vela, which is only open at, visible at low tide. It gives you a funny feeling to see a little thing like that,
Yeah.
1,000 or 1,500 miles from each shore. We didn't find the general.
Huh.
And then another adventure there is we flew the plane from the Philippines to Hawaii on what they call the Sunset Mission to get the planes back to the United States. That's another long trip.
Yes.
We flew to Guam from the Philippines with a pilot by the name of Herb Johnson. I was a second navigator on that flight. And we got to the Philippines and there was a typhoon. And so we spent an entire day in the operations office playing bridge with the Quonset, pieces of Quonset were blowing down the street, which would cut your head off, you know.
Of course.
And then the next day we flew to Kwajalein, which is another long trip. And then we flew from Kwajalein to Johnson Island, which is only a mile long.
Yeah.
I navigated that leg, which makes me
speck.
feel good.
Good for you.
We found it, we found it. And I navigated back once from Japan when Andy Baxter was tired, which was a kind of an adventure because to look up all of the things you have to look up in books after the star sighting takes a while. So it took me like 30 minutes to do that. And when I got done, I had a triangle about 3,000 miles square,
Wow.
which is frightening.
Sure. You didn't find Amelia Earhart, did you?
No, I didn't find, we could have. But thinking quickly, I used the North Star
Oh, yes.
to give me my latitude, and I used sun lines when it came up in the morning to get
Oh,
latitude. lunch, anyway, back, course.
Brilliant.
Distance is North Star course. And we read Drift, I read Drift, and I couldn't read it quite right, and I got the bombardier to read it, and we got the Tinian, which is good.
The brilliance of Wichman.
Yeah, I think so.
Wonderful. It's just
in
wonderful.
retrospect, maybe I was lucky I wasn't a full-time navigator, because that is one hell of a responsibility.
Yes, it is. It
You make a
certainly
mistake
is.
and you cost everybody his life.
I should say. Well, you know, and the remarkable thing about it, Bill, is, and your family will appreciate this so much, is that this training that you got and this experience, how it served you through the rest of your life.
Marvelous. I have enormous admiration, as you do, Ted, for the military after having been in 3.5 years.
Yes.
They took good care of you. And there's something in your article that you gave me by Spats. The 21st Bomber Command, which was the B-29s, was described as the most well-organized, technically proficient bomb organization in the world.
You give credit to General LeMay?
General LeMay did that.
Yeah.
And of course, all of them, you know, the West Point graduates and
Sure.
were terrific,
Absolutely.
terrific people. So anyway, we went back to the Philippines, and we had an officers club party where Woody was in charge. They had cockfighting, which I know is not thought of to be
not
too
politically
good.
correct.
No, not politically correct. And another great adventure is we took a Jeep to Baguio up in the mountains, and on the way, we left at dinner time. About 11 o'clock we got lost. The bridge was out. Here we are in the middle of Hukbalahap territory. You know what that is?
Northern Luzon, yeah.
Communist guerrillas, and we had to go back and find the way.
Good God.
And we survived that. But then, when we went home, I don't have much memory of this. We finally got home. Or finally, we're told to go home. And Woody and I and some other people, we must have flown to Saipan on a B-29. I can't remember it. And then we took a hospital ship home. We weren't sick, but that's what they used.
Yeah.
We spent 2 days on Saipan. The decision points were whether or not to turn in your 45 when you went through the line.